All right, I see 5 p.m. has come upon us. Should we get started? Let's see a thumbs up or
Yeah, I
ready
think we
to
can get
go.
started.
Good. Well, I know there's. Oh, sorry. I think my assistant's going to be barking in the background, and I see Kasia has her cat there. But I'll be brief. Uh, just welcome to all those online taking the time to stay connected to get up to date information on the OCP process here. And we're holding a meeting focused on really focusing on IHOS, Savary Island, and the traditional territory of the Tla'amin people. We've got a large group online, I understand, which is great. And waiting to hear the presentation by our consultants from Blue Rock and our staff. Just want to remind everybody we want to conduct ourselves with this business with respect and kindness, right? And where everybody involved really does care about deeply about the island and the future, and that's what we're here to talk about and where we are in the process. So with that, I'll let the staff from Blue Rock and our staff explain sort of the format of this meeting and how they're going to handle any questions at the end of the update. Thanks.
Excellent. Thank you, Director Lennox. My name's Jonathan Schmidt, and I'm the project manager for the consultant team, and I'll be leading the first part of the presentation. And we did want to mention that we had this scheduled for 5 to 6:30. However, we do have a little bit of time beyond that if questions go. So we encourage your patience. If there is an opportunity to end by 6:30, then we will, but we want sufficient time for all the questions. However, we have a hard stop at 7. So just so everyone knows, this webinar is being recorded for the opportunity for those who could not make the event. We'll start with some introductions. So as mentioned, I'm Jonathan Schmidt, the project manager for the consultant team with Blue Rock. We also have a few other team members here. We have Kasia and we have Kelly, who will be presenting later. Kasia's our climate change expert, and Kelly's registered professional planner, as well as an engagement expert as well. So we'll go through a few introductions here and then the meeting protocol. We'll have a presentation about planning and about the island, and then a little bit on the process to date and the process to come, and then a Q&A period. We also wanted to introduce the QRD staff. We have Charisse Roberts with us, and we have Laura Rodden. So as Director Lennox mentioned, we just encourage everyone to respect our rules of engagement, be curious, create a safe space for ideas and discussions, challenge ideas, but don't challenge people. Listen with an open mind and ask questions and listen to understand. We do apologize for this a little less interactive format that we have tonight. We were hoping to do small groups, but we really wanted everyone to get a letter in the mail or a postcard in the mail, and that just wasn't possible with the mail strike. And so we have this webinar format to start here, and we're really hoping that in the new year, we can do more small group format engagement, ideally around 30 people or less, so that we can have the cameras on and the mics on and have that more interactive experience. We do have a few interactive elements for you tonight, but it's not the same as being able to see all your faces and to listen to your ideas and concerns. Oh, I think I went over quite a bit of this already. As mentioned, thank you for your patience. This is a webinar style. There will be voting and entering answers with your cell phone, so have those ready if you do not yet. So we'll start off with something fun, which is one of my favorite comics, Calvin and Hobbes. And this is all about how not to plan, perhaps. And as a planner, I think it's somewhat ironic that I find it funny, but Calvin is definitely not a good planner, and he doesn't look ahead very often, but thankfully he has his bud Hobbs, so we want to be a little more like Hobbs and think ahead. The opposite of planning, perhaps. So we're going to get into a bit of interactive questions here, and if you haven't used this type of polling, forgive us for the technology. We hope it works. So you can scan the QR code with your phone, or you can go to this web link, pull up a web browser, go to pollev.com/planning250, and that should bring up questions that you'll be able to answer. So we'll go to the first one here. And the instructions are still on the top there. You can still scan that QR code. And so the first question is, what do you love about Savary Island? And we know from our survey that you love a lot of different things about it. Obviously, the natural beauty and the water and the flexibility around what you can do on your properties. But this is also a little bit of an icebreaker test to see if the technology is working for everyone. And so it is a word cloud. So if you repeat words that are already on the screen, they will get bigger. So that's a way for us to tease out and understand what's most important to the participants here. If you want to connect words, do so with a dash, and then you could have more of multiple words or a connected thought. Always very interesting to see what people put away from it all. Quiet, solitude, undeveloped, freedom, community, nature, beauty, beaches. Someone put 1908. Maybe that was the year that it got subdivided. Trusting neighbors, yeah, peace, no regulation, grid, remote. We'll wait till it kind of slows down a little bit, and then we've got a few more questions. But definitely freedom, community, and nature are coming to the forefront. Still a few ideas. Maybe give 5 more seconds. Everyone can get their ideas in. There we are. Okay. Freedom, nature, beaches, community, environment, family, peace, grid. Yeah, we'll explore all of these in the coming days and months as we move ahead with the project. I am going to move us on to the next question now, in the interest of time. So, question just about who we have in the room, the virtual room. How long is your history or your family's history on the island? Isn't to judge anyone who's new or older on the island. No one gets preferential treatment in the way that we do planning, but it's just really interesting often to know. Because we did hear that through a lot of the survey work and the comments that were provided, just how much interest a lot of families have in the island, and that it goes back quite a few years, as shown here. Yeah, more than 30 years, your family's history on the island. Yeah, over half of the participants with the individual or family history going more than 15 years. All right, looks like it's kind of settled down. Give you 5 more seconds on this one. Just a few questions from the chat. Oh, someone's asking, how do I vote? So there's instructions at the top of the screen. So if you go to pollev.com/planning250 on your phone, the question should come up there. Or you can scan the QR code. And it appears that there's 69 participants. Somebody asked how many. If you don't have a phone, but you're on a computer, you could open a web browser and go to that as well. You could type that in this link here. We'll move on to the next question, but really interesting. A lot of folks with more than 15 years and a lot with even more than 30 years interest in the island. And a number of less than 5, so yeah. So a bit of a homework question. Are you familiar with the current Savary Island official community plan? And yes, they do have one if you haven't read it. And there's no judgment either way. So I'm not gonna find the people who haven't. It's just a starting point for all of us to know who's in the room and how much we need to cover. Yeah, a lot of people with a lot of familiarization with it, and probably some people who are even part of that process previously. And if you haven't read it, it is available on the QRD website. And so something to do while you're doing your weekend reading or afternoon or evening reading. The other one that's good to read, and we'll touch on it, is the Texada Official Community Plan. It's quite new. The QRD finished that pretty recently, and it's a quite compelling read as far as official community plans go. So almost half have read the official community plan cover to cover. That's outstanding. This is not like other communities that I work, I'll tell you that. So a very well-educated bunch. We'll go to another question about the island, and it's kind of current and future. What is the #1 issue facing the island? And I believe, is this a word cloud? This might actually be just statements that you can make. Oh, no, it is a word cloud. Yeah, and if you want to, yeah, hyphenate things, then you can connect ideas, words together to make a complete idea. And as we'll get into in a little bit, we really want this plan to be one that's developed and owned by the people of Savary Island. And this is the start where we pull ideas from you to help shape the plan and to shape what the key issues are that the plan should address. Overdevelopment, land use regulations, washrooms, roads, water. Traffic. Maintenance. Overdevelopment regulations, roads, fire, dust. Those are kind of creeping to the top. Allow you a few more seconds here. We'll keep going in order to stay on time here. I think we're getting a pretty good sampling. And once we go back and analyze these, we'll see some of the overlap too. So we have overdevelopment with a dash and overdevelopment without a dash. We have regulations and then regulations imposed in the future. So we have a few things that we can pull out as key commonalities. Setback regulations, we've heard that from a lot of the feedback already to date. So I'm going to move us on here in the interest of time. Wharf. So 3, 2, 1. Go on to the next. Thank you for participating in that. I know it can be a little tricky with the technology, but we wanted an opportunity to have this interactive. So I'll do a brief presentation here and then pass it off to Laura and Kelly for a few slides on process and a bit on background information. So as Director Lennox said, we want to acknowledge the Tla'amin lands and that they have their own names for a lot of the places on the island. And so wanted to start with this map, which are some of their place names. And we are going to be communicating and working with the Tla'amin during this project, and we've already had one meeting with them. So one of the principles, philosophies that I strongly believe in is that people support what they create. A lot of my projects have heavy community engagement aspects, and all of our team, Kelly and Keisha, and getting to know Laura and Charisse as well, really believe this too. And so this is not going to be a plan that we write and that we impose on the community. It's going to be a plan that all of us write together. We are tasked with pulling together all of the different ideas and at times conflicting directions. But in the end, we really do want to create a plan that is supported by the community and is created by the community. A little bit about our team. We focus our work in small villages and towns, places like Castlegar at 8,000 is really big for me often. I love working in smaller places. Kelly and Keisha the same as well. And so here's a bit of a sampling of our experience. A lot of villages and small places that we've been fortunate to work, and we really like that hands-on, smaller municipality or smaller area and rural area work. So what is an OCP, an official community plan? Well, it sets out a long-term vision for a community, and it establishes and achieves that vision through goals, objectives, and policies. So if you have done any planning in your life, you've looked at something in the future that you've wanted to achieve. I'm a runner, so for me, maybe it's a race that I want to do. I need a vision, so that's, completing the race, and then you need a way to get there. So that's training, and, there's steps along the way. In the case of an OCP, the vision is kind of that goal race, you might say, that end thing. And then you have goals, objectives, and policies that are the smaller pieces meant to take you towards that vision. And just to think about things a little more broadly, even what is planning? We often talk about planning in a lot of different contexts. As a registered professional planner, some people joke, oh, are you a wedding planner? Well, no, we're what you might call land use planners. And what does that do, and what is planning? One of the inherent parts of planning is, of course, that it's future looking. As we saw from the Calvin and Hobbes cartoon, it pays to plan ahead, to look ahead. And so that's something that is inherent to planning, is it's future oriented. It often guides land use and development, as many of you know. It adds certainty. So one of the things that is often maybe not mentioned enough is that having some policy, and in other communities in Savary, having regulations provide some certainty as to what's going to happen, next to you and what can happen on your property. And that can be really important because it gives people a sense of calm, to know what could happen. I think a lot of people are on the call today because they're unsure of what might happen in terms of rules or in terms of development. And overall, planning strives to help communities meet their needs. So I have another planning comic here. So we have Calvin and Hobbes walking, and Calvin is saying, "Live for the moment is my motto. You never know how long you got. You could step into the road tomorrow and wham, you get hit by a cement truck. Then you'd be sorry you put off your pleasures." That's why I say, live for the moment. What's your motto? And then Hobbes in his wisdom says, look down the road. So we like to think that planning is a bit of looking down the road. And so a little bit more about planning. Planning is really guiding those expectations for what can happen in your neighborhood. I haven't watched this movie, but I just love the title in terms of how it relates to what we do in planning. In that, I've watched a few clips of it and what can go really wrong if you have a bad neighbor. And so in planning, we talk about the fact that what one person does on their property, it can negatively or positively or neutrally impact their neighbor. And so your freedom to do what you want on your property is limited by the extent that it might negatively impact your neighbor. And so you always have to keep that in mind, that what you want to do on your property, if you want absolute freedom to do things on your property, well, that's going to be limited by the extent that it may impact your neighbors, because if your neighbor wants ultimate freedom, there's a limit to that too, because it's going to impact you. And so figuring out how that plays out in the world, and through policy, is one of the great challenges of planning. We try to avoid this bad neighbors. So we also wanted to touch on the fact that official community plans are wide-ranging across British Columbia. You have some that are really regulatory. And so if you've pulled examples before, and maybe that's why a lot of people are on the call today, because a lot are highly regulatory. They have prescriptive policies that say, thou shall do X, Y, or Z. They have development permit areas that say, you can't build here, but you can build here. They say you must do this and you must pay for this and do that. That's a highly regulatory official community plan. On the other side of the spectrum are more aspirational official community plans, things that are guiding and visionary, and policies that are encouraging and supporting of of directions of the community. And it's not necessarily a heavy hand, it's more of a social contract, we could call it, where community members, you know, they're not heavy-handed to comply with the OCP, but they all agree that they want to achieve this vision and they want to achieve a way of being in their community and a way of living on the land that's agreeable to all them and meets their goals and aspirations. And so it's through that social contract and those community discussions that you reach your vision on the more aspirational. And from being on the project for a few months, I think we're leaning a little more towards the aspirational side. We're really in the QRD do not have the mechanisms to be highly regulatory, but it's through this official community plan process that we're going to find our way along the spectrum. So what is the legal criteria for an official community plan? You can find this on the provincial government websites, and I've provided the link at the bottom. If you want to go through the Local Government Act, and some of you already have, as noted in your emails, you can find these requirements for official community plans. So things like residential development to meet housing needs, present and proposed commercial, industrial, institutional, agricultural uses, public facilities, sand and gravel deposits where it's relevant, phasing of roads, and then the use of land that is subject to hazardous conditions. And I know a lot of people have flagged that one already. It is a requirement to address it at some level, but as we mentioned, it's up to the community and it's up to the QRD as to how that plays out, what the policies are to address that. And as almost half of you have already read the current official community plan, and we'll get into it a bit. It has development assessment areas, so they went away from development permit areas for those hazards, and it was a bit more of a informative level rather than a regulatory level. Official community plans must also address housing policies for affordable housing, rental housing, and special needs housing, and it has to have greenhouse gas reduction targets. So those are the legal requirements. They're fairly general the way they are written in the law, in the Local Government Act, and it's up to each municipality and official community plan to how they will address them. Another spectrum that we can talk about that's similar to the aspirational and regulatory is the understanding between rural government and urban government. And so, as mentioned, I work in a lot of smaller municipalities, and so does our team. It's what we enjoy because there's more of that social contract with landowners. There's less government responsibility and more landowner responsibility, more in that left side of the screen here. And that landowners are willing to accept that risk. And we want to acknowledge that. We've heard that from you in a lot of the comments. And we know that you're not on the other side of the urban where there needs to be a lot of government rules and then less landowner responsibility. But there needs to be an understanding and a recognition, and I feel like there is, of where the community is along that spectrum. So what can an OCP do? And whether it's aspiration or regulatory, OCPs still have a lot of power to create this vision and set expectations for what can happen. They can guide decision-making for the RD board and staff around funding. So it was mentioned washrooms. Well, if the OCP identifies that as a high priority, then that's a message to the RD board and to staff to fund that appropriately and to create a plan and to implement it around that. Also, a lot of provincial grants require, or there's a benefit to having things within your official community plan that you then apply for grant funding for. Maybe it's the washrooms again, in that the QRD doesn't have the money, but will apply for a provincial grant for some amenities. And so they will cite the official community plan policy that says it's a high priority. And that could help the application. We have one hand raised. Terry, if you want to put in the chat or in the Q&A.
Jonathan, Terry's already, we've been answering in the Q&A.
Oh, okay.
The
Okay.
chat's I just wanted to mention the chat's disabled. because it does get quite disruptive during webinars. So we've got the Q&A function that's allowed. And for
Perfect.
folks that aren't able to participate by phone, you can, if you're comfortable, put your answers in the interactive items into the Q&A, and we'll capture them there. Sorry for the
sure.
interruption.
No, it's okay. We'll keep going. And the other thing that an OCP can do is guide the decisions of businesses and landowners. As mentioned, if it is a more aspirational document and a little less regulatory, that doesn't mean that people don't have to follow it. The idea around a social contract focus of a plan would be that the community generally agrees that this is the direction they want to take. And so businesses and landowners can follow that in order to achieve the benefits that might come from following that vision and policy direction. The other aspect, and we'll touch on it a little bit, is that there's a lot of different levels of government at play on Savary Island. And so having some values, directions, policies, and goals within the official community plan can help those collaborations. Maybe they can identify what the people want to see on the island, and maybe where you need support from different levels of government and where collaborations need to happen in order to achieve those goals. So what goes into an official community plan, as many of you have already read the existing one, you're probably aware that there's policies, maps, and it's generally the two key components that make up the OCP, and those are created from a combination of public and stakeholder input, best practices, knowledge of the project team, and that includes not only those that you see tonight, but also any other QRD staff and board that bring that knowledge here, as well as existing policies, directions, and budget priorities that the QRD board already has. We want to build on those and make sure that it's seamless. So just a little bit about the challenge of creating an OCP through community engagement. The public and stakeholder input piece is a significant challenge for all of us in planning, because it's very difficult to get one single vision, one single idea from an entire community. We know that it's broad. And so we've pulled out just some of the spectrum of comments that we've received already on this project. And if you just read the surface level of some of them, they can seem at odds. You know, some people want more land use regulations, some people want none. People want their children to enjoy it. They want more services or less, better roads. They want to maximize landowner rights, grow tourism versus stopping tourism. So we really want everyone to have an understanding that you may really believe strongly in your values and where you want to see the island, but there may be someone with maybe not quite the opposite view, but maybe a bit of an opposing view to yours, and that you all make up the people of Savary Island. And through all of that, we want to create a community plan that moves the island forward and you reach your vision. So we really want to take all these things and pull them together into a community plan that is supported by all of you. And that's the challenge. It's the challenge to take all of those disparate ideas that may seem contradictory, but I think what we've felt and what we've read is that you all love the island. You all love being there. You feel like you have something special. And so how do we move forward in the future, knowing that you share that dream of keeping the island special? What does that mean for the OCP is what we're going to explore over the coming months. And we really want you to remember that we're at the beginning of the process. No decisions have been made. It's a blank page. We haven't written anything. There's no draft official community plan yet. There's the existing one, but we haven't put any pen to paper on this one or this update. We want you to know that we've received your comments and that we will be providing a What We Heard report in the coming weeks, which will summarize, and we've heard so much that it's taken us longer than expected to put together the What We Heard report from the initial survey and the initial engagement. The other thing to remember is that the existing technical reports and best practices are background information. We will discuss those and we will see where the community is at and how those can be used to inform directions of the plan. But that no means says that whatever in a background report will be in the plan. And I know there's been a lot of concerns around that. So I feel like we've already covered some of the existing OCP, but it was done in 2007. A lot has changed since then. It is a pretty good document for its time, and I believe a lot of background research and effort went into it. So it's great to hear that many of you have already read it. It addresses key topics. As mentioned, the development assessment and development permit areas. It addresses environmental, marine, and heritage resources, as well as economic activity and residential use. And here's a few maps. As you can see from here, kind of the middle of the island, the land trust area, or the island trust, was denoted as residential. So certain things have kind of aged, but it was a pretty simple land use designations here, just 4 of them. And then we have the development assessment and development permit areas. As mentioned, the development assessment areas were their attempt at the time to address those ecological and shoreline hazards, but didn't require permits. It was more of an understanding that those are areas that have constraints, and to, as a landowner, take note of them. So we're at the current situation here, and we'll kind of zoom in. And what surprised a lot of us when we delved into Savary Island was just the amount of lots that have been subdivided. It's nothing new for many of you, but it's pretty surprising for such a small island. We then did a fairly basic analysis in terms of what might be developed on the island and what might not be using tax assessment. And so thanks to some of the GIS skill at the QRD, we looked at assessment values of greater than 50,000 for the properties that were deemed developed. Those deemed partially developed, an assessment of between $10,000 and $50,000. And then the other properties were either undeveloped or have no or limited development potential for various reasons. And you can see the results on the map here. So the estimate, and we'll caveat that this is a pretty quick desktop analysis. We know there's other data around utility use, but it's that there might be over 600 undeveloped properties that could be developed on the island. And what we say development potential is that it's just that they're lots that have been subdivided that don't have a home on them or a building. And from a quick assessment, there may be potential to put a building there, but we don't know in terms of groundwater and those kind of constraints. It didn't look at that. There is a groundwater assessment being done, and Laura will touch on that in a bit. So potentially over 600 undeveloped lots that could possibly be developed on the island. And we'll explore. Yeah.
Oh, I'm just going to interject really quickly here. For those that are putting your questions in the Q&A right now, we will be answering them at the end. We're not going to stop the presentation to answer. And if I type an answer to you right now, then it goes to the already answered, and we want to answer it live. So just letting you know, I'm not ignoring you. They will be answered after the presentation.
Thanks, Kelly.
Thanks.
And so one of the things that we also wanted everyone to be aware of, which I think a lot of you are, but just the multiple jurisdictions that are on the island. We have the QRD addressing fire halls, fire protection, the wharf, planning, parks. We have DFO, of course, Ministry of Forests, Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure, what a lot of us call MOTI, Vancouver Coastal Health, in the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change. So as mentioned, there's quite the hierarchy of jurisdictions. And now I'll pass it off to Laura for a few thoughts on the work underway on the groundwater assessment.
Thanks, Jonathan. Yeah, so I wanted to share just some thoughts about the work that's been going on behind the scenes. So we launched the OCP review and update in August of this year. But in actual fact, staff at the RD have been doing a technical background review since 2022. And a lot has changed on Savary since the Savary OCP was adopted in 2007. Some of the key things are the Tla'amin Nation settled their treaty, and they now have lands and treaty rights on Kayekwam, which is the name that Tla'amin knows Savary Island as. And that's a difference from the OCP, because the OCP refers to Ihos, but that we've learned recently is a legend, and the name of the island was actually Kayekwam. And the BC Nature Trust has acquired the lands over 300 acres in the heart of Savary. Those lands are now protected. Savary Island Land Trust has acquired a number of parcels of land across the island that are also protected for conservation purposes. And there have been a lot of private land consolidations, and we've seen those here at the RD because they get referred as a subdivision. And there is a policy in the current OCP that promotes lot consolidations. And that has been quite successful. We've seen a number of those. And we've seen development increasing. So, you know, the almost 20 years since the OCP was done, we hear from people that own property on the island, concerns about the amount of development happening. We can see it. I mean, I moved to this region in 1995 and was very familiar with Savary right from when I arrived. And it is a different place now than it was in 1995. There are a lot more homes. There's a lot more cars. There's a lot more traffic. And there has also been, one of the other key things is provincial government policy and funding has really pushed local governments to do coastal flood mapping and consider climate change and sea level rise projections, and to do climate change adaptation planning. So the regional district has received a large number of grants through our regional emergency program to do coastal flood mapping. And that's a key piece of information for the OCP update. If you want to move ahead to the next slide, Jonathan.
Yeah. Do you want to touch on the groundwater assessment and when it's going to be finished?
Yeah, sure.
Before I move on.
Yeah, so this study is currently underway. Many of you are probably aware. You might have participated in the online engagement or met Sylvia Barroso on the island. She was part of the OCP engagement in August over there. And you might also have been involved in the water sampling that's as part of this project that happened in September. Water was a big issue in the 2007 OCP, protection of groundwater, concerns for protecting the groundwater for the future, for future generations. And so this study was commissioned and it's going to be provide key information to guide policy development during this review and update. We're expecting the report to be done by the end of the year. Be probably coming forward to the board in January, and the findings will be incorporated into future engagement. So far, I can say that the results have shown clearly that there is an abundance of fresh water on Savary Island. And so the concern is not about water quantity. The concern is more about water quality, saltwater inundation in some areas from sea level rise, and just natural dynamic processes. And also concerns in some places for nitrates, which is coming from seeping septic tanks. So this is going to be very important information for guiding land use policies. And so there are a bunch of reports that are important. We have provided links to them on the project webpage. I'm just going to do a high-level overview of some of them, but the Let's Talk Land Use report was not focused on Savary, but we did have a Savary engagement, and it was very well attended. We had, I think, 130 participants in the online engagement, and the majority of people really wanted to see the regional district take on more land use regulation. And that sort of triggered us to look more at the Savary OCP and think that that was the next OCP that should be reviewed and updated here, since it's getting close to 20 years old. So yeah, this slide shows like over 40% of the Savary responses expressed concern about land use issues and demands on potable water supply. Only 10% of the responses indicated they had no land use concerns, and close to 2/3 of the responses indicated that existing regulation is inadequate to manage land use and avoid conflict.
We'll just go back. Any more comments on the
Yeah,
background
I
reading?
wanted to mention some of these. So some of the other, key pieces are like parcel map BC mapping. We're looking at that, the assessment roll data that goes with it, to figure out how many developed parcels, how many undeveloped parcels, what the development potential is. The coastal flood mapping and the coastal flood adaptation strategy triggered the need to have an updated slope hazard assessment done, which was completed last year. And that's caused a lot of concern on the island. We heard it in the survey responses. We've seen it in the letters, the emails that have been coming in. And I think a lot of it stems from a misunderstanding that the hazard study will just be put into the OCP. Like Jonathan was describing earlier and explaining, the Local Government Act requires local governments to consider restrictions on lands that are subject to natural hazards. But we have taken different approaches in other parts of the region. So, I mean, the current Savary OCP has development assessment areas. The Area A OCP has development permit areas. And all of the other OCPs in Area B, Area C, and Area D, which is Texada Island, have maps showing the hazard areas for information purposes, and then we have policies encouraging best practices for those properties that may be affected by a potential hazard. And I have to say that the hazard mapping is potential hazard. It does not mean that there is a hazard for certain. And that's part of I think that's part of the problem. It's a high-level study, and it's going to inform our land use policies. But I don't see the need for a great change from what's in the existing OCP. And I think that it can be even simplified to what the regional district has adopted on Texada. So that's a good example to look at for the natural hazard policies. And I can answer any questions after the rest of the presentation.
Thank you, Laura.
Okay.
I'll pass it off to Kelly now. You'll go through the process to date and the process to come.
Okay, thanks, Jonathan. So tonight we wanted to clarify where we're at in the process. We know that there's been a lot of frustration and questions and misunderstandings about the start of the project. So we wanted to clarify some of that. We also wanted just to explain our team's approach to engagement. I'll reiterate some of what Jonathan's already said and maybe go a little deeper into some of the elements. And then again, we'll talk about the process and some of the next steps from tonight. So our team always uses the International Association of Public Participation methodology. For short, it's called IAP2, and it's a global best practice that's used across a variety of different types of projects to look at how to engage with community, or some are called stakeholders, and at what level you engage folks at, depending on what the decision is to be made. Tonight, I can give you an example of what we're doing. It's on the very left side of the spectrum here, the inform. So we're here to provide information, background, study information, summaries, things like that. It's not an interactive. I wouldn't consider this an engagement session. It's because we are mostly information out. As we get deeper into the process, we're going to be moving along the spectrum to talk to folks and have live discussions in smaller groups, and work with the community that way. So this spectrum is just to show you that there are different things we can do throughout a process. Some of it is going to be sharing information, just getting information out. Some will be doing things like surveys to get feedback on where we're at, and others will be more in-depth engagement, which will be coming along in this process. So Jonathan touched on some of this before, and I just wanted to reiterate why we engage as a team and why we engage in projects. The foundation of it is a sense of and building mutual trust between us, or the client, which is the QRD, and then trust between the community members and between the work that we do as a project team and the staff team and the district. And that's a mutual relationship. So I can give you an example of how we've been attempting to do that in this process. We've heard loud and clear some of the frustrations about not having mailouts. So as Jonathan mentioned, we'll be working on those. We've created a frequently asked question document because there was a lot of misunderstanding about some of the information and the direction that this project may or may not go. So we adjusted and created that. We've also adjusted our timeline, and we've also added different ways of getting information out and hopefully clarifying the process. And this tonight is one of the examples of that. So we go back and forth between inform, educate, we hear you, we listen, we adjust as we go. And hopefully at the end of the day, our goal is to build community support through this OCP. Jonathan, we'll go to the next one. So we are in what we're calling phase 2 in the project plan. I'm going to talk a little bit very briefly about phase 1 and then the future phases. So we'll just go to the next slide. So project initiation was in the late summer, early fall. The first thing that we did was we came to the island. A couple of us from the project team had the opportunity to get to the island right away to launch the project, to get an understanding of the island, and to meet some of the folks that live there full-time, that live there part-time, some that are seasonal residents. And we had a chance to tour the island. So that was a really great opportunity that we took to dip our toes into the Savary Island context. And that was our first session of engagement with the community. It wasn't the only session that we're having on the exploratory phase of the work. So we just want to be clear that that was just one piece of the puzzle. It wasn't the end of the stage. And so we have many other events that are also that are going to be happening throughout the process. We did form an advisory committee And we had a call for recruitment, formalized an advisory committee. We've met once with them. And then we did produce an engagement report from the August engagement that we did on the island. So we are in phase 2 now. And we had a certain number of activities planned. With the mail strike, again, we had to adjust. And we also wanted to make sure that we're helping clarify just some of the conversation that might have been happening between community members and clarify some of the directions that we can go and that we were considering, and where we are in the process. We've added the webinar tonight to share information. We are planning to have smaller community group sessions so we can have conversations remotely with folks on certain topics. So those will be coming up in the new year. We're producing a background report, and then we'll also have a phase 2 engagement report come out as well. So the next step after that is to talk to the community about key directions. Once we have a good understanding of the vision and some of the guiding principles, where the community's at with that. And then we start kind of funneling down into more detailed conversations. So that will be the next phase coming up, and we'll have the advisory committee meet during that time, and everything that we do will be posted on the project website for engagement reports so that you can see how we've progressed through the conversations along the project. Phase 4, again, we're going to be honing in a little bit more on the details. So that's when we start looking at drafting the document itself, the first draft. And then we look at working with the community again to review that, get feedback on where that's at before we go any further in the process. Once we get the feedback from the community, we make revisions accordingly, and then we go to the next phase, which is typically the approval process. So again, you have a chance to engage on that at a public hearing. That's a more formal process than most of the other engagement. But again, it's another chance for you to have your say on the official community plan. And one thing I should mention is we are planning to be back out on the island in July. We heard loud and clear that most folks are there in July, so we've adjusted the schedule to accommodate that seasonal situation on the island as well. So we'll be back out again to meet in person with the community. We did want to touch quickly on some of the outcomes from what we've done so far. And so this was the first of many engagements, the August sessions that we had, and we do recognize it was short notice, but we wanted to take advantage of the opportunity to get out to the island while we could once the project was started by the region. We visited with about 50 people at the in-person open house. About 30 or so people stopped by the farmers market just to talk to us and get to know, what the project was and what we were doing and who we were. And we got to know a few folks as well. But it was really interesting. We'd asked people what their vision was, similar to what we heard tonight, what you love about Savary Island, what you value about Savary Island. And then there's that kind of push-pull between we don't want any regulation, we do want some regulation. So we've got more conversations to have to figure out what that looks like for Savary Island. Next slide. So in October, we continued the questions that we were asking at the in-person sessions in August, and we launched an online survey, and we had quite a good response to that. So the intent of that first survey round that we did was really to test the existing 2007 OCP vision and guiding principles, or the goals. So it wasn't anything that we created as a team and said, this is what it's going to be. This was from the original official community plan. And we just wanted to do a temperature check to see, does this still resonate? Are there things that we need to change as we get into this process? So next slide, Jonathan. So we just wanted to provide you with a quick snapshot. We're still going through all the responses. There were over 500, so 575 people participated in that survey, which is a great response. The communities that we've worked with in the past, we were happy to get 5, maybe 10% response rate per the population. So this was a very high response rate, I would say, but a lot of that has to do with the ability of community members to let each other know what's happening and what the issues are. So we had strong responses. We had, a good split of male-female participants, a good age range, and we also tracked residential status for Savary Island in the survey as well, was one of the questions that we asked folks about. So a good range of folks did provide their input into that survey. And we'll go to the next slide here. So we're just this is just a little snapshot, and we'll have a more formal report for you posted on the project webpage. But again, we want to reiterate, more discussion is going to be taking place with the community. But with the existing principal aim, it's called in the existing official community plan from 2007. There was a fairly strong agreement with that statement. And I know that some folks are like, well, anybody could agree to a vision because it's kind of, higher level statements, but it does really help frame some of the conversations that we're going to have. It doesn't mean we can't talk about something, but it just helps us get an assessment of where things are at and where people are thinking, what they're thinking is for the future of Savary Island. So, so the existing principal aim did resonate with the survey respondents so far. And then we just wanted to maybe highlight kind of some of the extremes maybe, or just a couple highlights from some of the goal questions. So we had a very strong level of agreement around safeguarding the island's groundwater supply. And then the lowest level of agreement was around the question about land use regulation and the desire for the rural island lifestyle. And we've been hearing that loud and clear through the FAQ questions that we've produced, through the emails the district has been getting, and just the comments and the feedback. So we've been hearing you, and we know that there's a lot more work to be done on that as well. So we'll just go to the next slide here, please. So with that, as I said, we're going to be doing more engagement. Tonight is more of an information session. And so for us to get a sense from community members, we're just curious. We're going to ask you a poll question again. And if you're having troubles with the poll, you can enter your answer if you're comfortable into the Q&A. But we're just curious how you would describe success for the Savary Island Community Plan. And we've got a multiple choice here that's set up. So feel free to enter your thoughts on one of those choices. Okay, so we'll give it a couple more seconds for folks to get their answers in. It looks like a kind of a horse race, doesn't it? When you see the lines moving back and forth. So we've got right at the moment, we've got strong support for B, which says as little regulation as possible. And then ooh. Okay. And give it, okay, so we'll close the poll here in 2 seconds, Jonathan. Okay, so as little regulation as possible, balance environmental preservation and landowner rights comes in second. Community feels heard, represented, and confident in the plan is third. Strong environmental preservation for future generations. Increase education on the island's challenges is one of the lower, and this the responses. So again, it's not a scientific survey, it's just a temperature check. We just want to get a sense of kind of where folks are thinking with that one. So I think that ends our presentation section for tonight. We did want to remind folks, given the mail strike right now, our only option to communicate with community members is through either email notifications or posts on social media or on the project webpage. So we really encourage you to go to the QRD project webpage and sign up for email notifications for the project. And we'll be updating that. That'll go directly to your emails. So you'll get notices on that right away. We are still planning to do a mail out to let every landowner on Savary Island know that the project is going on and that there will be engagement events coming up. So with that, do you want to take this on, Jonathan, and I'll...
Sure.
Oh.
So if you can help us with the Q&A as well, Kelly. So as mentioned earlier, but if you joined late, which I think a few people did, just based on the numbers, we do have the Q&A set up. And so there is an opportunity, I believe, according to Zoom, to upvote other people's questions. We already have a number of questions. And so if there's priority on certain ones, that may help us just with our time here. But I think for now, Kelly, do you believe that we could start at the top and then go down? And then if people upvote, I don't know if that's possible. They said it was in the Zoom information. Then that might prioritize certain questions.
Jonathan, I did want to mention that Laura had asked one earlier and I responded, letting her know that we'll take it at the end. So it moved over to the answered, but I would
Okay.
like to read it out and get an answer to this live if possible, and then we'll move into the Q&A list. So grant funding from the province, does the QRD have to go back to Savary folks if and when they are seeking grants? And also let Savary people know what they hope to do with said grant funds. So Laura, this might be a good question for you to answer.
Mhm.
Okay, well, generally, staff at the RD are always keeping their eyes open for grants that fit priorities. Whether it could be that the community has asked the RD to do something, like an example from Savary would be the boat launch needs to be upgraded. And so our operations manager found a grant. He went to the board and said there's a grant available, and the community wants to have the barge ramp or the boat launch upgraded. And then we applied for the grant, we got the grant, and I believe the work's going to happen in the new year. So that's an example. It's like our staff always have their ear to the ground. So for any services we're providing on Savary, we're always on the lookout for grants.
Thanks, Laura. Jonathan, this is a question for us. Has Blue Rock ever done an OCP for an off-grid community?
That's a very good question. I don't know if I've done an OCP for a completely off-grid community. I've worked in some of the most remote areas of BC and Alberta, including 500,000 acres of Métis land in northern Alberta, which almost touched the border, the northern border. I've worked in the far eastern part of Alberta, which is maybe one person per section of land, 640 acres. So I've worked in some of the most remote areas of Alberta and British Columbia, but I don't know if I've had an area that's fully off-grid. Some of the First Nations that I've worked with are partially off-grid, but I don't think there's been an area that's fully off-grid. Kelly?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've worked with rural districts that are all on their own service. not necessarily off-grid though. But I have worked on developing tools for solar and wind and geothermal implementation for different jurisdictions and different decision makers on how to site and how to hook up, and cumulative effects of that on the landscape. So have some experience with that. All right, next question. Will the OCP review report to the community on the implementation plan of the existing OCP to update people on what targets have been achieved? So this is in relation to the old OCP and the implementation section.
I can
That's a
answer
very good
that one.
question. Yeah, Laura?
Yeah, it is a good question, and it's it is interesting because the implementation plan is very regulatory. In the current OCP, it says they're can explore zoning and site permits and groundwater protection plan or something like that. There's a lot of very prescriptive items in the implementation plan of the current document, and I don't think any of them have been implemented. I see no record of it, and I have worked for the RD now for 12 years, and I have never had anyone approach me from Savary saying, how come the regional district isn't doing this or isn't doing that? So yes, we will be looking at those, and are those still actions that are important to people or not? I think we need to do a check-in on that.
Yeah, for sure. I would just echo that. And yeah, it's mentioned throughout about the zoning bylaw, and from the response of the community that we've heard, that's not something that, a lot of people want to see. And so this is the opportunity to reflect on those, to see which ones we should move ahead with and which ones do not have support. So thanks, Laura.
Thanks for that. So Rick just mentioned that we may have, Jonathan, I think this was during the jurisdictional slide. You may have moved the words or said the incorrect words. You said Island Trust, and it's Nature Trust, not Island Trust. So we'll make sure to do that correctly going forward. Thank you for that, Rick. And then we have a question about verifying information with other data, and I believe that came in when the population data came up on the pie chart, Jonathan. So just a
Yeah,
question.
that's part of our background work. We know that there's other sources. We don't have access to the full data sets of some of those other sources, but we are waiting, especially on the groundwater assessment report, which should have a pretty good understanding of the current development state. And then we're looking for some of those other sources as well. So it is preliminary, and it just gives a sense of a pulse check of where development is at on the island, and then we look to verify over the coming months some of that data.
And then the next question is a follow-up to that around someone doesn't understand the less than 10,000 number. There's no bare land lots worth that range. So that was just a statement, I think, more than a question. So
yeah, 10,000 was used because if someone had an accessory shed or something on a property, then we didn't want to just use the zero assessment number, because we're looking for more which ones have, say a home in a lot of cases, or a small business building.
Yeah.
And we felt like that was just a quick assessment check on what may be developed or partially developed or undeveloped.
If I could just add to that too. So those are improvement values. They don't include land.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the land values are high, but
Yeah.
what we were
Yeah.
looking for was to see
Yeah.
what level of improvements were on there.
Yeah.
Because ultimately we want to know what the development potential is, or what the growth potential is.
Exactly. Thanks, Laura.
Thank you. Rick commented that land trusts are private owners, not jurisdictions. Did we have something on the jurisdictional map?
Yeah, we had some other elements on that map. They were in the bottom left. And they were mentioned just because they are a large land owner with a significant specific interest versus other landowners, which don't always make known their specific interest, whether it be land protection or development.
Right. Okay. Thank you for that. We have a question about amalgamated lots. So this person has 3 amalgamated lots with 1 cottage. The question is, are our 2 lots without a cottage considered undeveloped on your map of the 670 plus that are not developed? Getting into the technical details here.
Yeah. It would depend. We'd have to get into the parcel fabric layer, so we'd have to ask the GIS tech in terms of how that worked. Yeah.
Okay.
Unfortunately, Caleb isn't here at the moment.
Yeah, and it is our first preliminary assessment, as Jonathan mentioned, so we'll be refining this as we get more information too. Thanks for that question. Next one is again about amalgamation. You mentioned that amalgamating lots was supported. We did this recently and did not notice any support or even a reduction in property tax. There's no question, but Laura, would you like to respond to that at all, or is there anything to respond to on that?
Well, I will say you'll often see an increase in a subdivision where you're creating separate lots because it's creating more development potential. But when you're amalgamating, I don't think the inverse happens because the land values on Savary are so high. And BC assessment bases their appraisals on market sales on the island. So, and those values have gone up in the last few years, of course, as we all know, and all of our assessments have gone up. So I can't really answer that question, but there's not really a correlation, I don't think, between amalgamating and assessed value going down, if I'm understanding the question.
Yeah, and it may be referring to wondering if there are going to be tools that can be offered to help more people do amalgamation, if that's a goal of the OCP.
And maybe
That is,
yeah, maybe I could just jump in and add, that's where I think you're on to something, Kelly, is people are asking about what are the incentives that we can have for people to engage in the process and consider doing that with their properties. And, you know, that's where, coming out of this as well, my thoughts go to lobbying at UBCM and some of the political activities we can do to get that support from senior levels of government, like BC Assessment Authority and the BC government. So.
That's a good point.
Thanks for that, Director Lennox. So this next question, I believe, was asked when we were talking about, I think, Laura, you were talking about the, oh boy, the name of the project is escaping me, but it was the Let's Talk Land Use, I think. Is that correct?
Yep.
So the question is, when did this take place? That is not the response to regulation I am hearing. And then another one regarding that project right after that. So I'll just, could you just please clarify when that project took place again, Laura? Sorry, you're on mute.
sorry, that was 2021 when that project took place.
Thank you.
And yeah, so it's 4 years ago.
Okay.
And I think that's why we're here now with the OCP, is that there was some interest in what it would mean for the official community plan based on the responses, but it's not as if we're going to put policy in place based on the Let's Talk results. we're here because there's interest, and there was interest expressed during that process. And so it's now up to the community and up to the team to work with the community to flesh out, well, what does that mean? Is that still the way everybody feels? Do we have more voices at the table? What are those voices saying as the comment mentioned? And so we need to go through the process to flesh out what it all means.
Right. Thanks for that. How many survey respondents were there from Savary regarding the outcome of only 10% respondents not wanting expanded regulation? And again, that's the same document that they're referring to, I believe.
Okay, I don't have the document in front of me, but it is available on our website, and the appendices do have the summary reports from the survey. So if you were so inclined, you could look it up. I don't have the numbers in front of me. Yeah, I know there was like 120 something in the online engagement, and the survey numbers, I think they were 500 and something for area A, but I don't think there was a breakout for Savary Island in the survey.
Okay. And that's maybe something we could add to the FAQ if we do have that information. If we don't, then the report is available on the webpage.
Yeah, I think Charissa or Laura actually sent it to us in an email chain the other week, and yeah, I think it was around 150, but we'll look it up and provide it within. But it was definitely over 100 total Savary respondents.
Okay, thanks for that, Jonathan. Anonymous, what is the total budget for revising the current OCP? Laura, do you have that handy?
I do. Yeah, the total budget is $100,000.
Next question, if there is a vacancy on the advisory committee, will it be backfilled from other unsuccessful applicants? So for those that don't know, we formed the advisory committee. We recently had someone that had to step off of the committee. And so we are down one member, but the terms of reference did have a range of folks in terms of how many would be on the advisory committee. So Laura, I'll get you maybe to expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, the terms of reference that were adopted by the board specify that there'll be 10 to 15 community members appointed to the committee. So 15 people were appointed. As Kelly said, one member has decided they have to step down. And we haven't discussed replacing that empty seat, but it is something that could be considered.
Thank you, Laura. Okay, this is a big one, I think. Anonymous is asking us how, can you please tell us how in-depth the recent erosion study was and who conducted it? And how come you refer to the Thurber study from years ago that was found to be flawed at the time? I'm going to just ask those two pieces because there's a bit more and we'll get to those in a second.
Okay. So the slope hazard study that was done last year was done by Tetra Tech Engineering. And the Thurber report was the report that looked at slope hazard prior to the old OCP, the 2007 OCP. And best practice is that hazard studies are revisited prior to going into an official community plan review and update. And given that Thurber report is, I believe it's 30 years old at this point, and it didn't consider sea level rise projections or climate change. And so the province has updated their guidelines for doing slope hazard assessments. And so that's why, those are some of the reasons we need to do the new study.
Okay, thanks, Laura. And then the next part of that question or statement is the RD recently asked for applications for committee members to be on a garbage study. The application stated that applicants must be at least 18 years of age. Why then is the Savary OCP panel different as a teen applicant is 14 years old? As was stated in the initial Zoom, the committee should be landowners. So any comments back on that?
Sure. So the advisory committee for this process, for the community plan review and update, we had a list of criteria that we were looking for to get a broad cross-section of community members, and age range was one of those criteria. And we wanted to attract youth, younger people, because often what happens in local government planning processes is it tends to be older people that participate because they're retired, they have time. And so we really wanted to make this a more engaging process and attract the full demographic range of people. And there is one youth member that has been appointed, and that member's parents own property on Savary. And I believe the posting the person is referring to, the garbage study, it's the Solid Waste Management Committee that the regional district is seeking volunteer members to sit on. And that committee is about a service that's delivered. It's a different department of the regional district, and it's not a community plan. It's about solid waste management service. So there are differences in the types of members that they're looking for.
Yeah. And it is good practice to include the youth because the OCPs are longer term. And when that youth is of age to own their own property, it will be their future. So that's a very common practice in these types of processes. When will the results of the October survey be shared with us? We have done an initial pass through all of the comments. The survey results were close to 200 pages. So it does take time to go through and categorize everything because we know that there's a lot of scrutiny in the items that we're putting out. So we want to make sure we do a good job of reporting back. So it is taking some time. We don't have a set date for that yet, but as I've been mentioning, we will be emailing folks directly when that's available, and we will post on social media as well. So if you haven't done so already, please sign up for notifications on the project webpage. Anyone else have an addition to that? Laura?
Yeah, I'd like to add to that, Kelly, just that it is labor intensive preparing a What We Heard report. And, you know, we had 575 respondents to the survey. And the qualitative comments, we have to really be careful because of the Freedom of Information Protection of Privacy Act that, you know, sometimes people will include names or, and we have to make sure anything like that is redacted. So there's a number of steps we need to go through before the report is ready for the public.
Thank you, Laura. And it was a great response. So, and really great feedback in that survey, and we'll be sharing that as soon as we can. Thank you for that question. So another question up here, would the OCP inflict on the setback rules on existing houses? I think this relates back to a lot of the FAQ answers that we've provided to the public. So Laura, would you like to respond to that?
Could you repeat the question, please?
Would the OCP inflict on the setback rules on existing houses? So I think this has to do with the setback study that's been mentioned several times.
Right, okay, so the current OCP from 2007 has development assessment areas, and they're basically a boundary around the outer island and some of the inland areas. So that was based on the Thurber report. And so the OCP will be considering the more recent hazard study. And like I mentioned previously, earlier in the presentation, there's different options. So if the community wanted to have development assessment areas on those slopes, like you currently have, that's one option. The other option is there could just be a map for information purposes and policies that encourage people to best practices that live on some of these coastal bluff properties.
Right.
And then there's further regulation because there's different options, and we'll explore those.
But at this time, Laura, there hasn't been direction to have a setback that would require existing homes to be moved or demolished.
No, not at all. No
I think that's
direction
kind of
on
where
that.
their concern is coming from too, that it would be retroactive and homes would be moved because of a setback, and that's simply not the case.
No, that's not the case. The Local Government Act protects all existing development. It would be exempt from anything if the OCP were to bring in development permit areas or setbacks or zoning and regulate setbacks. All existing development would be exempt from that. Yeah. But
And
we've
even
made no
said that's-
decision.
yeah.
So further, next question, could there be a community garden? That's a great question, and that's something that we could explore with the community to see if that's something of interest and that could be operational. But yeah, that could be put on the table for sure. So thanks for that question, Terry. Next question, is there a schedule set for the next public engagement sessions? There is not yet a schedule. We had initially set one, but then the postal strike came and we couldn't get the notices out through the mail to every parcel owner. So we have not yet scheduled those. We heard loud and clear people want a direct notification of the next round of events. So we've committed to doing that. So unfortunately, we can't give you a date yet. But we will, as soon as we know, we will start posting it publicly. So thank you for that question.
Stay tuned to the new year, and once again, please sign up for the email notifications.
Absolutely.
And
Next-
encourage your friends and family to
Yes,
sign up as
spread the
well.
word.
Yeah.
Does Tla'amin First Nations have a ceremony space on the island?
Not that I'm aware, but we have heard in one of our initial meetings with representatives from Tla'amin that it is something that they would be interested in developing.
Yeah, great question. Thank you for that. Would you consider the subdivision on Savary to be a rural or urban? Oh, this is a great question. Jonathan, do you want to maybe respond to that? I know we've had this discussion a few times.
Yeah, it was discussed at the initial advisory committee meeting. Because the lots are relatively small, they're almost urban in size in their lot dimensions, but rural in character because of the setting, but also because of the unserviced nature of them and off the grid nature. So it's an interesting dilemma, but it's its own thing, I think.
Yeah, and the density of them is definitely more towards an urban context. So
Yeah.
it's an interesting juxtaposition that that the island's faced with for sure. So thanks for that question, Liz. Next question, are there any Savary landowners on the advisory committee? All of them are, except for the youth probably, I would assumed, is not allowed to own land. But as Laura mentioned, her parents do. There are, sorry, I should correct myself. There are two Tla'amin representatives on the advisory committee that I believe don't own land on the island. Is that correct, Laura Charisse? Please correct me if I'm wrong.
They don't own land personally, but the nation owns land, yeah.
Yeah,
And they have treaty rights as well.
yes. Okay. Is Savary still scheduled for fiber optic installation by 2027? Anyone
That's a
want?
great question, Ms. Rodden. You know, that's sort of not Ms. Rodden's department, and I'd have to get back to you on that one because the whole IT kind of delivery to all of these different areas within our area is a question mark in my mind. So if we get whoever asked the question, we'll get back to them and follow up with you on that one. It's a good question. I have the same questions myself. Thank you.
Okay, we'll definitely note that one. Apologize, we don't have that answer, but as Director Lennox said, we'll get that to you. Next question is, can you post the QRD lot consolidation policy on the website, please? Laura, is that something that it's not there or it's in the OC?
It's in the OCP.
Yeah, the plan is on the project webpage. There's a link to the plan and the policy is in the plan.
Okay, so that is available. If you do have any issues, the planning staff's email is on the project webpage and you can get a direct link from them if you're having problems finding it. Sorry, Charisse, to put you up on the block there, but
Just to clarify, that's the OCP policy that supports consolidation and encourages it. I don't think it requires it, if I remember correctly. And so it's not a requirement, but it's an encouragement in order to kind of deal with some of the potential development opportunities and constraints on the island.
thanks for that, Jonathan. Another, I think this is a comment. As you've remarked, there's been a lot of change on Savary. Increasingly, planning issues strike me as matters of interface in various ways: environment, recreational, residential values, reconciliation, urban, rural, remote. I hope this will be a nuanced process and not one ultimately characterized by up or down voting priorities that are simple articulations of those sensitive and complex matters. Great comment, great observation. Absolutely. As we've mentioned several times, we'll be digging further into this through discussion with community. And tonight was not meant to be a deeply engagement approach. Deep engagement approach is more information out and clarifying some of the information that's been moving around the community. So thank you for that observation. And it's well taken. Is lot amalgamation at odds with provincial policies on affordability? Anyone want to respond to that question?
I think you could look at it from different perspectives. I think the lot amalgamation on Savary is unique just because it is subdivided into such small parcels. You can't even meet the minimum parcel size for on-site servicing under the current provincial rules. Like they would never approve subdivision with lots as small as on Savary right now. So I think it's more Yeah, I don't think it's at odds because actually, now that I'm thinking about it, the provincial webinars we've done on the changes to housing policy and regulations, you know, it's lots of 1 hectare for on-site servicing is the best practice. And here we're looking at lots that are a lot smaller than that are developed. So it's not
And
really
also,
rubbing.
yeah, Bill 44, which the province put out, which was small scale missing middle housing bill, as well as the subsequent bills, all assumed full servicing. So when they're asking municipalities to have 3 dwelling units on a lot or 4 dwelling units on a lot, it was under the condition that they were fully serviced. And so like this case is not contemplated within those bills that we're trying to get to affordable housing.
Exactly.
Okay, thanks for that. Will the QRD be putting disclaimers that the data that is being put forward, for example, the Tetra Tech, undeveloped land, et cetera, is speculative in nature? It's an interesting question.
I don't know, Miss Rodden, if we use that type of terminology in OCPs, but disclaimers, I'm not sure that's part of the process.
I think in future engagement, we're going to be talking about how these are high-level studies and how they can inform best practice at the site level.
The challenge for the community is really, where do you want to go from here? There's not a lot of benefit into arguing over the details of past studies. It's, where do you want to go from here? Do you want to use that study as information to direct future development? Do you want to use it as more information background, as Laura said? That's the big question here, and that's why it's really up to the community and the community values on how those studies get used. And so we can definitely, put disclaimers on things. That's not a problem. And we will refine some of the look at where the current development patterns are and what the development potential is, and that's from the groundwater study. But it's really wanting the community to think future forward rather than just look at some of the existing documentation. Where do you want to see Savary Island in the future? And then what are those values? And then what are the policies that we can put in place within the official community plan that take you there? It's not really going to be productive within this process to, look at the intricate details of the Tetra Tech study. It's how do you want to treat that, and how do you want to move forward, looking ahead to your future as an island.
Thank you for that, Laura and Jonathan. Next one is more of just an observation and a comment. Comment that the webinar was informative, easy to follow. Good to have the 2 presentations together between Laura and Blue Rock. Providing information in digestible, smaller pieces is helpful for Savary. Repetition of messages and information is helpful. And looking forward to groundwater survey findings in the future. So thank you for that comment. Appreciate that.
Kelly, just a pause,
Yeah.
because we have about 15 minutes left and we have 15 questions. So I'm just wondering if we should try to hold the questions for now.
Yeah.
For no new questions. And then if we have time before 7 o'clock, then we can ask for additional questions, but I just want to make sure that we can get through the ones that have already been asked.
Yeah, great for that. Thank you.
Yeah, and if people have questions that they haven't had a chance to ask, they can email Charisse and I at planning@qathet.ca.
Okay. We'll try and focus in on maybe some new question streams. If I can filter through these quickly. Have any local community members or organizations been engaged as a consult in this process? So yes, local community members are on the advisory committee. They've also been involved in responding to surveys. And they've been, I'm assuming some of you folks here listening tonight are from Savary Island. So yes, absolutely. Locals have been involved, and for organizations, some folks on the advisory committee are also members of different organizations in the community, and they also have the opportunity to participate in upcoming engagement processes. So thank you for that question. Question about what addresses are being used for mailing, the ones that are on file at the QRD for assessments, I would assume. Are
Yes,
going to,
at the most current assessment roll data.
okay. So the committee does realize the current proposed setbacks would impact a large majority of the landowners. This has already been addressed a couple of times. Again, we understand that it's information. Nothing has been regulated or imposed at this point in time. And the OCP process is going to be discussing all of this information as we move through the process. Anyone want to add to that one? Oh, okay. Since SILT receives funding from QRD and they have been your island tour guide, should not their participation at all levels be disclosed? So I'm not sure. Keisha and I, when we were on the island, went by ourselves. We had no one with us, so I'm not sure what that's referring to there. So I'm going to move on to the next one.
I'll just add, Silt did act as tour guide for Charisse and I for an island tour.
Oh,
And
sorry.
because we had specifically wanted to see all of the lands that have been acquired for conservation purposes since the old OCP was adopted.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
And just for clarity, I've been toured around the island by many people and many groups, and I think that's quite appropriate that groups are speaking up in a proactive, positive manner about the island. Thanks.
Thank you. Great question here. What does rustic mean? It's a word that's used a lot. And I think that's something that we're getting feedback on from that survey. We've had really great descriptions of rustic. So that's something that we understand needs further clarification if we're going to use that word moving forward. So at this point, I would say stay tuned. We're digging into that, but it is a very common theme that's emerged in the survey, at least. So we'll be discussing that further as a community. Question, how is Blue Rock Planning chosen to head the OCP? Laura, you managed that process?
Yes, for contracts of this size, local governments are required to post a request for proposals on BC Bid and on our website. It was on Civic Info, I think, as well. It's a standard request for proposal process following our policies here and best practice. And Blue Rocks submitted the winning proposal.
Please restate the website address to visit and sign up for email updates. So if you simply just Google Savary Island Official Community Plan, the project page should come up for you, or you go to the qathet regional webpage and click on projects, and it should be there. And are you putting it up there, Jonathan, as well? Yeah, okay, so Jonathan's going to put that up there as well for you. So thanks for that question. Vancouver Boulevard is riddled with large potholes that make it extremely difficult and hazardous to avoid. Was this addressed in the 2007 OCP? But the state of Vancouver Boulevard, it's.
Yeah, roads are outside the scope of local government authority, but it is an issue that the regional district can collaborate with Ministry of Transportation on.
And I believe there is policy encouraging that communication to happen within the existing OCP. There is a mention of needing to engage with MOTI on that.
Yes, I was going to mention that there is a passage in there, and it is very current. Just for those people on island that are listening, as recent as today and tomorrow morning, there'll be some more calls about the condition, the sad state of those roads over there. So our role is advocacy. That's the BC government is in action. So it's not for this call, but I'm just letting you know where it's part of my role there. Thanks.
Thank you, Director Lennox. Next question, does Blue Rock Planning have experience in addressing fears surrounding the development of OCPs to the level that is being felt on Savary? Is this level of uncertainty normal for this process? Yes, I have been involved in many processes that are, and not just OCPs, but different projects that are controversial, that there's a very low level of trust between community members, between administration and community members, between the project team and community members. And so it does take a lot of work. It is quite normal. When you start a project like this, there's a great diagram. I should have put it on a slide tonight, but it's this ball of lines that are all mixed up. And as you move through the process, the lines start to smooth out a little bit and become a little bit more legible. And that's how these processes happen. They're very messy at the start every single time. As people start to get involved and hear about it and hear from their neighbor and maybe don't hear the reality of things or the facts. So it is quite common. And as we've said from the very beginning, our job is to try and build trust with the community, be open, transparent, and adapt as we go. And we're always open to feedback, suggestions. We won't get it perfect. As you know, we're not from Savary. So we look to the local experts that are Savary Island residents to learn from you, just as much as we hope to help build some of your capacity around planning. So thank you for that question. We have a couple minutes left. We'll try and get through as many as we can. Can the OCP protect current owner's ability to renovate or repair after damage if the property is located in designated sensitive areas?
I think, as we said before, there is currently no proposed regulations that would prohibit that. And so through the process, various policies can be explored, but this isn't a regulatory document the way that some people think it might be directed towards. Laura, do you want to say more on that?
I think that I agree with what you said. Yeah, it's not a regulatory document.
What tools are there to help Savary reduce density?
Yeah, and I think the density question was around the lot consolidation because typically in a lot of rural communities, subdivision happens as development happens. In this case, it's quite unique where subdivisions happened a long time ago with the lots already there. And so the density is there unless changed. And so there was previous discussion, and Director Lennox mentioned about the idea of maybe there could be incentives around lot consolidation. Some of the previous questions was perhaps there's something around taxes. We don't know if that's feasible. There's often challenges on that, but there might be other incentives in order to encourage lot consolidation, which is around the question of density. Laura, do you have anything else on that?
No, I think you gave good examples, and I think we can look at what the Islands Trust has adopted. They have a incentive program that if you have set-asides on your property for conservation purposes, then you're eligible for a tax benefit. And like Director Lennox said, that's something that the board can advocate for, allowing our local government to adopt perhaps in the future, and that would be an incentive.
Okay, thank you. Are there others interested in land back? And if so, has this relationship building begun? Is there anyone want to comment on land back? I don't think that's something that we've explored at this point.
No, Ms. Rodden, there's been no discussions at the board level or any communications from Tla'amin Nation or otherwise on that particular phrase or intent. But as Ms. Rodden's well described, the communication is there with the appropriate folks with the nation. So that's where we're at.
Thank you for that. Will the consultants be bringing forward best practices from other OCPs they have seen or dealt with? Jonathan, we always do, but I'll let you answer that.
Yeah, we definitely can, but it is quite a unique case because it's not just rural. As we said, it's already subdivided, but also on an island. So there's not a lot of perfect examples of relatable OCPs. I think the Texada one has got to be the closest one. It's definitely a bigger island with a little bit more complexity. But I think if you're going to be staying up late reading OCPs, encourage you to pick up the Texada one because also done by the QRD, done quite recently, similar issues, also an island. You're not going to find a lot of other examples that are as similar to Savary as Texada, I don't think. Laura, unless you've found some others.
I think that, yeah, the Texada is a good example, and I think I'm getting the sense from the more I hear from people on Savary that we're probably going to arrive at a similar place where people are wanting an aspirational type OCP with not additional regulation. And I think the Texada OCP is very clear and concise, and it's easy to navigate. And so that makes it easier for property owners and developers and realtors and staff here at the RD and the board to implement.
Great. Okay, thank you. Next question is a bit of a technical one. What is the minimum parcel size now in the province? So I'm assuming that's asking about provincial legislation, I think.
Yeah, for unserviced lots, I don't know offhand. The health authorities often work in that realm. Laura, you had cited a few different numbers there, but I think some communities too are going to site-specific issues, whereas if you have a lot of bedrock, it's a lot different than if you have certain soils. So it's not always going to just a number in terms of lot size. Laura?
Yeah, it's all about the servicing. I think ultimately it's all about the servicing. If you're within an improvement district area, or you have an on-site well and septic system, all of the regional districts, OCP and zoning bylaws align with the Vancouver Coastal Health subdivision guideline for minimum parcel sizes. And but minimum parcel sizes isn't something we really think about on Savary because everything's subdivided. I think there's one, maybe two parcels with any subdivision potential.
Okay. Thanks for that. The next is a comment, kind of a legal comment, so I don't think there's anything that we can address. It's more just a statement. Next is how many public community meetings did Texada have and how long did their OCP take from start to finish? I know we answered this in the FAQ as well, so it is there. Do we want to comment on it here? We've got like 2 minutes left.
It is in the FAQ.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is that the last question?
There's a couple more, actually quite a few more, but we've
Okay.
answered 59 questions so far. So just trying to think if there's a really quick one. Yeah. Oh, there, just a clarification on one of the questions that was answered earlier by Anonymous. So the question they had was in reference to hiring as a consultant. So they wanted to know if any local community members or organizations were engaged as a consultant for the Savary OCP. That was the question. Sorry, I misread that initially.
Yeah, it's not
So,
something,
at this,
yeah, it's not something we've done on this project with the large advisory committee. We feel like we have a lot of voices that are local. Working with First Nations, that's something that our team has done previously. But in this case, with such a large advisory committee, a lot of our energy is going to be listening to them and guiding that process.
okay, thank you. And sorry for misunderstanding your question originally, Anonymous. I'm gonna just leave it there. We have, I think 3 or 4 questions left related to parcel size and density. And then the last one is about Crown land on Tixie and Savary. So more kind of land technical questions that will be coming out. Some of that will come out in the background reporting. And we can delve into some of the more detailed questions as we move through different engagements in the process. So thank you everyone for attending tonight and working through the questions with us, asking the questions. Again, we are going to be engaging in the new year as soon as we can in this next round of engagement. And I'd just like to ask maybe Director Lennox or other team members if there are any closing words that they would like to share before we say good evening.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks for the opportunity. Lots of great questions, making me think as well along the way. And this feedback is invaluable for the process, right? And so I think we've heard loud and clear that that feedback is being received and incorporated. So, as I've told many folks, I'm listening, right? This is the listening time for me as your area representative. The other directors are listening too. Our planning committee are the ones who then take an OC, first of all, adopt an OCP and then take action about it or not. And as we've mentioned before, the previous OCP, there were some recommendations and the people at the time chose not to take action. So those are the discussions we'll have down the road, but it's about the island and it's about the people on the island. And we're just underway. So I think great job for this update. It's important. We'll get through the strike and we'll get everybody in the loop that's not in the loop. And we appreciate that and look forward to doing some more work on this soon. Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year from me. That's it for me. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.